The principles of design help us organize the elements of design in a more effective way. Some people call these the formal properties of art because they are used to organize. Those principles of design are balance, movement, rhythm, contrast, emphasis, pattern, and unity. These principles of design always work together, and as we define them and work with them, we'll always be using one or the other of the principles to help us understand the one we're working on better. They are hardly ever used alone, always used in combinations. What I'm trying to do here is to balance these two elements in this on this ruler. I've got a heavy full can of Coke and a little jar of tempera paint. I'm trying to find a way that I can balance these. Balance is a sense of being comfortable in this, and it's also a sense of being comfortable in a work of art. So in our works of art, we have to have balance also. We'll see several ways that we can establish balance in a work of art. When two elements on a balance like this, or in a painting also, are equal on both sides of the center, we call that symmetrical balance. If one of the elements seems much larger, but is lighter in weight than the other one, and they still seem to balance even though they are seemingly off-center, we call that asymmetrical balance. In sculpture, if we look at a sculpture, the sculpture is balanced symmetrically. Right down the middle, both elements on both sides are exactly the same. I have another little owl here that is asymmetrically balanced. If we put a line here about where there's equal amount of weight on one side or the other, there's much more on one side, but it seems balanced because of the activity, all the activity in the head being on this side of the sculpture. Paintings also can either be symmetrical or asymmetrically balanced. This painting by Frida Kahlo is symmetrically balanced, with almost everything on one side being the same as that on the other. If we look at a Winslow Homer painting, Winslow Homer's painting has many more objects on one side than it does on the other. It's not symmetrically balanced. If we put a line down the middle, there's more weight on one side than the other, but the little bright spot over here seems to balance all of this weight on this side. Not all paintings need to be balanced asymmetrically or symmetrically. If we look at Mark Tobey's painting with an all-over pattern, there's no need to balance because everything seems to be already in balance. If we want to make projects using symmetrical balance, we can make a whole lot of charts like this with nice bright colors and cut out paper so that they're exactly the same on one side as the other. I can make them very fancy. I can keep adding pieces to that. I can keep building those up and keeping them in symmetrical balance. This would not be in symmetrical balance. So I could put that back in exactly the way it was in symmetrical balance. I can put lines down the center. So you can do all kinds of pieces of paper. You can draw in there, paint in there, add postage stamps, whatever you want to do, but keeping everything the same on both sides of a center line. Asymmetrical balance and projects that work with asymmetrical balance means that we have to have larger spaces on one side, maybe that are duller in color, balanced by a smaller space farther away from the center, from the fulcrum, that gives a sense of balance, a sense of being comfortable. So when we want to play with those, we have to, say we work on projects that are going to use those things, we have to put colors on one side that are a little bit duller, on the other side a little bit brighter to make them seem in balance. We can even move this over to the center a little bit to keep that feels in balance. If this were very bright over here, if we put something over here like this, it would no longer be in balance. This would be stronger. So we want to keep one side a little bit neutral, make the other side a little bit brighter. If we can look at this nice bright red over here, we can balance that. We can move that out farther even if that's so bright in order to make that and keep that in balance. Look, for example, at asymmetrical balance. Here's a photograph that is in visual balance, even though it's asymmetrical. If we put a line down the center of that, there's more activity on one side, but it's duller, more the same. Over here we have a lot of contrast between dark and light. Visually, that feels comfortable. Movement as a principle of design is the way we have of organizing the painting by forming movement toward a focal area. The focal area in this painting of Diego Rivera's is the place where the slave is being freed with the knife. Notice all the shapes, the dark shapes, move toward this place. The light shapes down here move toward this place. So shapes move toward this place. That's a kind of movement that we have in the painting. In sculpture also, we have visual movement. Our eye moves like from the tail here, across the back, up to the focal area, which happens to be the head and with these floppy ears. Most of the time, the focal area in an animal would be the head. And movement is very important in a sculpture. We can feel it with our hands as that movement goes toward the focus. Movement goes along long shapes like this. Such long shapes will help direct our eye towards some part of the painting. We can make a little project by putting some of these shapes down, these long shapes down this way, and then putting a different kind of paper, a different kind of shape where the focal area would be. See, we can bring these in close so that our eye moves along these lines toward that focal area. If we put a little mat over that, we have a very nice design that will show movement toward a focus, visual movement toward the focus. We can use curved pieces, which are much more interesting and much more fun to work with, also to move toward a focal point. So before you collage these down, stick them down, you can have them overlapping, winding around, but they're all curved pieces, all leading toward a focal area. That focal area, of course, is right in here. Notice how your eye just moves automatically on those long pieces. If we put a different shape in there, like a little rectangle, that makes it, I can put a little red dot in that rectangle even to make that definitely a focal area. And see if I put a mat over that. You can't help but be drawn in on that, and that's what visual movement does in a painting. It pulls the outside edges right into the focal point. What I'm doing here is arranging a bunch of black pieces of paper on a white background in order to produce movement. I'm going to make a collage out of this, but I want movement to go on white spaces into some, like this is going to be the focal area, that our eye will move on this, our eye will move on this. See those long pieces, like in our last exercise, those long pieces will help produce movement. And this is what we call visual movement, or passage from one part of the painting to the other. And a lot of paintings need to have that in order to hold them together. In one of my watercolors, we can analyze a little bit and see how movement works in a painting. This house is a focal area. This is a painting done in Hawaii. Notice how the light moves from here, from the lower left-hand corner up to the focal area. From the sky up on top, down into the focal area. From the upper left-hand corner, these neutral grays move down into the focal area. Everything in the painting leads to the focal area. Big shape over here on the right side moves down into the focal area, almost like those little strips that we cut, only this is with actual subject matter. So every painting, like a landscape like this, is more effective if there's a focal area and then movement on light value or dark value, visual movement to that focal area. What I'm trying to do here is to arrange these objects. I have some figures and some pillars or posts, arrange them in some sort of a rhythmic pattern. Rhythm is a principle of design that helps us to organize space by having regular repetitions of things happening. We can have regular rhythm, where these could be exactly equally spaced, or we can have irregular rhythm, where we do something like this, that these pieces would still be there in a rhythmic way, but they would be irregular, not quite so evenly spaced. When we look at paintings, we can find that happening in the paintings. We can look at Marcel Duchamp's painting of Nude Descending a Staircase, and we see these rhythmic repetitions of the legs, repetitions of the hips, repetitions of the shoulders, repetitions of the head. This is an abstract painting, but with the repetition and the rhythm, the painting holds together very, very well. We could look at one of Louise Nevelson's sculptures, a photograph of one of her sculptures. Look at the rhythmic pattern over here. Nice repetition helps to organize this part of her composition. Look at Robert Rauschenberg's painting. The red spots in here produce a rhythm because those reds keep popping out all the time, but it's an irregular rhythm. They're all grouped together down here, one by itself here, little bits of red over here, so the rhythm in this painting is irregular. So we can have regular and irregular rhythm that artists use to help organize their paintings. We can also work with a different group of shapes. We're using a whole lot of elements here from other projects that we worked on, but notice that how complex this can get down here. We still have the rhythms established. These are irregular rhythms. Usually irregular rhythms are more exciting than regular rhythms. They might get a little bit monotonous, but the pinks begin to repeat, the people repeat, the greens repeat, the yellows repeat. So we have all these repetitious shapes in here. We have a focal area right in here now in this design because of this shape that's different from all the others. So we have movement, and we have focus in here, and we have a beautiful set of rhythms that are being established. Architects are probably the kind of artists that make the most use of rhythm in their work. Notice in the Parthenon, which was designed by an architect a long, long time ago, notice the way the rhythm is in the columns, and that helps unify the surface and helps hold it together. Look at the landscape over here. We have a very irregular rhythm. Notice the way the trees create an irregular rhythm. Usually when trees are just growing in the wilds, they are not in a regular rhythmic pattern, but in an irregular rhythmic pattern. What I'm doing here is feeling the contrast between a smooth surface and a rough surface on this ceramic pot. Contrast is the principle of design that helps give us a little bit of excitement in our painting. The opposite of contrast would be sameness, and sameness leads to boredom. So when we want works of art to be exciting, we have to have some sort of contrast. In a painting like Paul Cézanne's still life, the artists use a great many kinds of contrast. For example, to make it exciting, he used contrast between plain areas with no pattern and areas that have lots of pattern. He has contrast between edges that are hard and crisp and edges that are very soft and almost disappear. He contrasts very dark values with very light values. He contrasts intense colors, bright yellows and reds, with very neutralized colors that are very gray. He contrasts warm temperatures in many places with cool temperatures, grays, greens, and blues. He contrasts textured areas, like all of this cloth in the background here, with non-textured areas, like the surface of the table. He contrasts geometric shapes, like the edges of the table, with very organic shapes of the fruit and vegetables. He contrasts large shapes and very large shape like this back here, and large negative shapes with very small shapes. So he has all of those contrasts, 8 of them altogether, probably more in here, but all of those contrasts help make that painting very, very interesting. One way that you can really begin to understand contrast is to work with a chart that really shows contrast. For example, I started one here, and we're going to keep working on that now, that shows intense color, very bright right the way it comes out of the bottle, and then neutralized with a complementary color. We can show dark value of the same color and light value. We can show edges that are soft, can paint them that way, edges that are hard. You can paint these larger, cut them out, and then put them on the chart. We have an area that has no pattern. These are all of Cézanne's contrast, and we have area that is patterned. Now we can find things in magazines. For example, we have cool temperature and warm temperature contrast. I cut some pages out of a magazine that show warm temperatures and those that show cool temperatures. We can check areas that are textured and non-textured. This is a textured and a non-textured area. We can do ones with areas with geometric shapes. We can put those in a little collage and mount those on there on the chart. Or we can make them with organic shapes. So we cut pieces that are not geometric. We can make a little collage out of organic shapes. And then we can contrast large and small. And we can put some large shapes in here. And see, we can put big shapes on one side to show large shapes. And then we can put confetti-like pieces on the other side. This is something that makes a big mess, but it also emphasizes the fact that there are the difference between large shapes and small shapes. And then you have a chart that has 8 different kinds of contrasts on it. And if you understand these contrasts, then you're able to put them in your paintings and make your paintings more interesting. They certainly will not be boring or the same if you continue to use all these kinds of contrast. I'm working on a collage here that is going to emphasize emphasis. And we're going to put, this is really emphasizing very warm colors, and they're going to contrast with cool colors. I'm going to do kind of a poinsettia-like design. The focal point is going to be right in here. Now, where we put the focal point in a painting is rather important. If we put a focal point, we don't want to put the focal point right in the middle. That doesn't make it very interesting. If we make a few lines on our paper before we start, where these cross, this is a good place for a focal point, here and here and here and here. So if we turn it up like this, we're doing a vertical, this is a good place to put the focal point. And we're going to emphasize movement toward that focus, and then the focus itself will be my point of emphasis. This is going to be kind of an abstract collage of a poinsettia plant. So we'll put some of these colors down. These are nice bright red colors, and I'm using 2 values of the colors. You see that? One's darker than the other. By doing that, I'm able to make shapes inside of this big overall pattern of poinsettias. So I will have light shapes and dark shapes. If I put the dark shapes together like this, one next to the other one, I'm creating movement. See, I'm moving from one shape to another, but the values are the same, moving toward the focus up here. So if I keep doing this, I'll be able to fill the whole page up with these big pieces of nice bright red color. In the focal area itself, I want to have something a little bit different. And in a poinsettia, that focal area might be pieces of yellow. The emphasis on this in this collage is on the red and on movement toward the focus. So I'll fill this whole page up with pieces of red color this way. Then we'll take a look at it and see how the design will look when it gets finished. Just putting the finishing touches in here. This is a nice red design, and it will show how the emphasis begins to work. And I'm really putting some brighter yellow colors in the focal area because that's my point of emphasis in here. Now look how these colors all begin to work together. This is kind of an abstract design now. It turned out a little bit more abstractly. I've put colors over the top and changed them a little bit. This one is very abstract. I've done another one that I did before that is a little bit more realistic but has the same properties to it. That the emphasis is really on moving up into the painting toward this focal area. Here there is great contrast, so the emphasis is placed right there. But the emphasis is really also on the fact that this is a warm painting with cool contrast. The emphasis is on a warm dominance with cool accents, and then the focal area being in this location up here. Notice how Toulouse-Lautrec, when he made this painting, made the emphasis up in here. This is where we call our focal area. And he has these big shapes leading up to that focal area. Actually, the emphasis here is on this group of people. The contrast in here between warm and cool and dark and light make the emphasis right here, and that becomes our focal point. Not all paintings really need to have that. Look at Jasper John's painting here, which doesn't have any focus. The emphasis here is on color and on the rhythmic pattern that is being developed, not on a focal point. I'm looking at a piece of Indonesian batik, which has been printed in a pattern. Pattern is one of the principles of design that some artists use. Architects use it a great deal, but painters also use it, and many designers do. Pattern is repeated elements of design. Any of the elements of design can be used. Line, texture, shape, color. Look at the pattern on the outside here as it's repeated around the edge. That's a border pattern. This little piece has also got pattern in it, repeated constantly from one part to another over and over and over and over again to make a regular pattern. This is a regular pattern on the outside. Patterns can be both regular and irregular. but these are all regular patterns that are woven into that cloth. Wallpaper also has a pattern. Look at the repeated elements that keep repeating all the time. Here are repeated lines, repeated textures, and since they're repeated on regular intervals, we call this regular pattern. We can find pattern in nature also, both regular and irregular. When you cut into a piece of fruit like this grapefruit, you can find regular pattern. Those segments are repeated again and again all the way around this circular design. Here we have a rock that has holes in it. The holes make a pattern in the rock. Those patterns are irregular. They're not in a regular sequence. I'm just experimenting a little bit here with this. It's just an eraser that I'm printing. Printing is probably the best way to show repeat patterns because you can repeat exactly the same shape again and again, but I can make it irregular. Here's the same shape repeated, but it becomes irregular as far as the pattern is concerned. If we want to make regular patterns, then we have to lay out a design on a piece of paper that is in a regular pattern. If I take this angel and print it and put it in one of these spots and print it again here and print it again here, and see, I can work it like this. This is called a drop pattern when they don't show up right directly below, one below the other, but drop down and move over to the side. That's called a drop pattern. And that's the way you see a lot of wallpaper is made that way. So you just would alternate squares that way and build up a regular pattern. I can also take those same things and make irregular patterns with them. I can use the angel and make an irregular pattern by putting the angel there and putting her there. And see, I can just make an irregular pattern. The angel is repeated, the element is repeated, but it's repeated in an irregular way. I'm making pattern here, in three-dimensional pattern actually, making it in a piece of clay. Pattern in clay is fun to make. See, this is a regular pattern being repeated, just one mark after another. I could use other kinds of tools, make other kinds of patterns. See, this will make a different kind of pattern. As long as I could repeat those like a brick pattern. See, I could do them this way, like a drop pattern, one alternating with the other one as it goes along here. So you have different kinds of pattern, but the pattern is the thing that makes the surface of a clay body interesting, or it makes the surface of your painting interesting also. People who work with quilts also have to use pattern continually. If an architect designs the front of a building, he wants the pattern on the front of the building to make that facade of the building more interesting. If we look at Paul Klee's painting also has pattern. Those repeated squares make pattern, like a checkerboard almost, but because of the way Paul Klee put them together, it certainly is not monotonous. What I'm trying to do here is to bring order out of chaos. There are a bunch of pieces of colored paper here. I'm trying to organize them and trying to create some kind of unity that it all feels together. The opposite of unity is chaos, and that's about the way this seems now. We can create a sense of unity a little bit if we kind of bring these together a little, but if we overlap them and bring them closer together, even pieces that are closer together, they'll begin to feel more unified if we kind of cluster them. So by bringing them closer together, I can make them feel unified. If I take out a few of these colors, like take out some of these green ones, maybe leave one for accent after a while, and have all the colors more related to each other, that establishes a greater sense of unity. See, they're all kind of warm against that cool background, and that establishes a better sense of unity. Now, I can also line up edges. I can take the edges of these things and line them up so that they continue from one edge to another and can tie the pieces together like that, so that that edge goes all the way across, comes down and ties those. If I tie those edges together, that will give me another sense of unity, of establishing a sense of belonging, everything belonging together. Unity actually in a work of art, see if I line things up like this a little bit, unity in a work of art means that everything seems to belong, everything seems to work together. And then if I put this green piece in here as a focal area, See, I can get all these pieces together. I've left out a few of those green ones. I've unified it by using similar warm colors with a cool accent, lining up edges, clustering things together. All of those are ways that artists can use to unify a painting. If we look at a couple of works of art that people have done just in recent years, we can see how unity has been established by these artists. Louise Nevelson, in her wood construction, has all kinds of pieces of wood. But look at the center part in here. It doesn't have any relation to these pieces at all, except that they're three-dimensional. But by painting them all white, that unifies this whole surface. That's going to be a very many different kinds of things happening, but a single color will help unite them all. We could look at a painting by Georges Seurat. Now look at the unity that's established in here. It's almost by technique, because all the figures are painted very much alike with all their hard edges and their stylization. It helps unify the whole surface because the figures are all over the surface. Not only that, all this surface is made up of very small dots in a technique called pointillism. And all those points of color help establish a sense of unity also throughout the surface. It's all a similar kind of texture. So by style and by texture and by brush stroke, we can also establish unity in the painting. Look at one of Van Gogh's drawings. The reason this is unified is because you can see all of those marks. Little dots, little lines, helps establish a sense of unity. So does the feeling of going from forward back into the painting in perspective. That helps establish unity. And the same color is used in the ink throughout the work. So here we have marks, the kind of color, the feeling of space going back into the painting. That establishes unity. Edgar Degas, in his pastel, used all of the principles of design, practically all of them, in order to make one unified statement. He used balance, asymmetrical balance. See, if we divide this up, smaller here, bigger here on this side, more activity over here. He used movement. All of these things, parts move. The values move, the colors move. Look at the rhythm that he used. All the rhythms of the hands and the arms, the rhythms of the skirts down here, all of those help unify the surface. He used lots of contrast between dark and light, between big open spaces and very congested spaces, between warm and cool. It's got all kinds of contrast happening also. Some artists, like Edgar Degas, use almost every one of the principles of design in order to complete his work. Not all artists use all the principles, but some of them use almost every one, as Degas did in his work. And when he gets done, he has a very, very beautiful, fully organized, and very cohesive and unified work.